Hi DevStyleR, we're here. You can find us at the lovely office building of VMware. We are here with the Strougo. He works of many types of software development. Hi, nice hearing you here.
Hey, nice to be here too. Thanks.
So, what kind of expectation of visiting Bulgaria did you have, and what kind of topics did you discuss at the Swift Software meetup?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are working to build a mobile development team here, doing native iOS and Android applications. And this is a team to work alongside with our existing teams in the US and India, working on several products at VMware, in particular Boxer product. At Swift Sofia, it was a really wonderful time to meet with the folks there. And I wanted to share with them the 8 biggest mistakes we made over the last 2.5, 3 years in scaling Boxer from a few thousand users to millions of users, right? Nothing went perfectly. I can say we made a lot of mistakes. We learned a lot of things on the way as well. And we're happy where we are now. But we put together a list of sort of the 8 mistakes or 8 sins that we made while we were scaling the app, and also 8 best practices that we've implemented that have been really good and that developers can implement now, and something they can do on their apps or on their existing projects, and then sort of prepare them as their projects go bigger and become more popular and have more users. So that was the topic. Yeah.
Can you share any information about your presentation at the meetup? Any details about the entertaining part, about the skills of the scaling?
Yeah, so one of the, I think the biggest ones where we weren't really listening to the users as much, right? We weren't really paying attention to frustrations that we're having, little things, and so we let little fires become big fires. We let little annoyances become, bigger issues. Remember, email is really personal. Email on your mobile device is really personal, right? This is something you're touching in the morning, multiple times a day, let's say 100 times a day that you're interacting with. And so if there's a little annoyance, it's going to annoy you 100 times a day, right? And not listening to that, not acting on that was one of our biggest mistakes. As far as things that we did right, it was the other end of that. It was having telemetry in the field, having a really healthy beta. So we have this set of thousands of beta users that are telling us, hey, this new feature is great, this other thing doesn't work so well, maybe we need to make an adjustment here and there, and listening to them and being able to act on them fast, right? And shipping on time, shipping reliably, shipping quickly, fixing things quickly, and developing features quickly, right? So our developers are happy too. They're not waiting months for their feature to be in production. Literally, we wrote it this week, it's in the market next week. So
how do you promote engineering excellence in software development?
Yeah, engineering excellence is a great question. So I think, for my opinion on it, it's a set of habits. So there's no quick tips or tricks or anything like that. It's really a set of habits that you establish. Like, do you build your tests first? Do you think about how this is going to be used? It's in our discipline, in software engineering, it's often a deep thought sort of type of exercise and type of work. So yeah, there's easy tasks you can do in programming. I can do it in your sleep, no problem. But there's a lot of work that we have to do, we have to think about. And so it's really about building the habits to make sure you're really thinking about what you're doing, that you're validating what you're doing, that you're minimizing risk, and that you're getting feedback quickly. The quicker we can get feedback, both for the developer, does the code that they've changed break some unit test or break some other part of the code, or does it all work, right? Does that code work in scale? Does it work in the field in production? And different habits that developers can have that make them both more productive, but better developers, right? To improve their skills. Yeah.
So what's the story behind your patent on the estimated network managed bandwidth?
Yeah, so this was a patent back in my time at IBM. And at that time, IBM was doing, they were doing consulting, and they were managing networks for clients. So you can imagine these are multinational clients across all of Europe and other parts of the world. And they were monitoring the networks of those clients, the routers and switches and the servers in those clients' environments, to make sure all of their remote offices were up and running, right? People in this other site could get to their email or get to something else. And so we were monitoring that. And in order to do that, in order for you to monitor a network, you've got to connect into it. And IBM had to pay for that connection. And data connections were really expensive, especially back at that time. And so we had to find a way to estimate how much network bandwidth we were going to use to manage their network based on the type of routers they had, the type of switches, the type of things we were going to monitor. And so that's what this was really about. It was really a technique to figure out how much this was, so we could avoid overpaying for these data connections, for these E1s, E2s, or even worse, buying one that's too small and not being able to manage and meet our contractual obligations. So.
Why iOS? What's the story behind it?
That's an interesting story. Why was iOS? So I, I wanted to do game development. I think as a lot of kids growing up. I grew up with Atari and the original Nintendo sometime later in my childhood, and I wanted to do games. This was really fun, especially at that time. Most of them were 2D games. You guys can remember the retro games now. I went to university for computer science, and when I got out, really there wasn't a market for that. So I went and did enterprise software, and that was really fun too. It was an interesting set of problems. How do you scale something across multiple servers? How do you make things that have a lot of concurrency and so on? And I was doing that for quite a few years. Then the iPhone came out. I said, this is my chance to get back into it. Like the little kid in me said, yes, this is it. This is the mobile console you can play with. It's a touch device. You can do all these things. So I started digging in. Of course, I had my day job writing enterprise software, server software. But I started doing this, in the evenings, weekends, and other things. And that grew. I started making my own little games. I started helping people with their own games. Eventually, I got into writing a book about game development. And then it sort of moved into iOS full time. A while ago, I moved into a small company called Big Nerd Ranch, where we did iOS training, and I ran the team that did the advanced iOS training. We went all over to train iOS developers and specifically take existing iOS developers and make them better at profiling their code, at writing more performant, more maintainable code, and a lot of other things, right? If they wanted to use OpenGL, or if they wanted to use other things that were high performance on the device. I know it'd be Metal nowadays, but it was OpenGL at that time.
And so you have over 22 experience, history of developing everything, maybe. So can you give more any advice to the beginners and the advanced iOS developers?
Yes, it's the old saying, like, do what you love, right? Do what you have passion about. But the reason we say that, the reason that you hear it so often, is that when you hear these things that people say over and over, it usually means there's some truth behind it. And in this one there is. If you're passionate about something, if you really like it, you're going to read about it and learn more about it, even when you're not in your 9-to-5 job, right? And that's what I would encourage people. So the iOS and Android ecosystems are really big. There's lots of different areas and specialties, and again, they're small compared to the rest of computer science and the rest of the space. But if you're interested in mobile development, whether that's Android, iOS, or maybe it's even both, find an area that you really like. Is it games? Is it applications? Is it this kind of thing? Is it that kind of thing? And really, really dig into it and build a lot of expertise there. Because I think you'll find both that it's fun and you'll learn a lot in the process. Right?
And what's the definition of your good code?
Well, good code. So I have this saying that I write code. I write some code nowadays, and then 6 months from now, I have to pull up that code for some reason. My first thought is, what kind of person wrote this? This is terrible. And and then I look at the Git blame, and it says my name on it. So I said, oh no, maybe I didn't have the wrong kind of drink in the morning or something. But no, to answer your question, the best kind of code you can write is maintainable code. In the beginning of my career, I thought the best kind of code is clever code. The least lines of code, the better. Turns out that's a terrible idea. You have a really hard time. I should say it's a terrible idea in most cases. You have a really hard time maintaining that code, reading it later. Trust me, a few months go by, you open that code, your memory has been wiped of that experience. You have no idea why you wrote it this way, and now it's unreadable, or close to unreadable. So write code that's easy to understand, easy to read, even the first time you're reading through it. Yeah. So.
Okay, so what features would you like to add to Android if you had a chance?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. What features to add to Android? Because I'm an iOS user at the moment. I've used Android. I even did a fun experiment where I said, you know what, I want to really feel what it's like to be an Android user. So I backed up my data. I wiped my phone. I basically factory reset my iPhone, all my iOS devices, and I set up my Pixel 2, and I was using that for 2 weeks. No phone. First thing I learned, the Apple Watch doesn't really work without an iPhone. You can even change time zones. So I did this while I was traveling. Not a good move. I had to get a different regular watch. But there's excellent Android watches, by the way, Android Wear. So I got one of those, and they worked really well. The feature that I missed about Android, and again, I don't know if it will resonate with Android developers, is that there's not a simple mode on Android. What I mean by that is, I like to think of iOS, at least when I'm using iOS, not when I'm developing it, like an appliance, like your refrigerator. So your refrigerator, you set the temperature, you don't touch it. You've probably set the temperature the first time the refrigerator was installed and you haven't touched it since. And it just works. You open the door, you put stuff in there, it stays cold. That's how most people treat iOS. Not developers, but that's how most of our users see it. That's the phone operating system. I don't have to change a bunch of settings. It just works default with a lot of the way I want it to do, right? Where I've changed the background, I've changed something else. And on Android, of course you can do those things, but you also have a whole bunch of other switches. So everywhere in all of the apps and in the Android OS, right? At least I'm talking about the Google, straight up Google implementation of it on the Pixel. You have tons and tons of toggles. So if you're interested in really tweaking out things, Android's fantastic for that. But if you just want sort of a vanilla experience, I want this to work as a smartphone and I have to deal with it, that's what I miss on Android. That's a feature I wish they would bring. But both have their strengths. Both platforms have unique things about them. Some interesting things.
So let's talk about the future of education. What kind of skills will students need in the future? What do you think?
Yeah, so that always changes. You know, people always think, I think the old answers used to be they have to know math and science, or they have to know this, or they have to know this algorithm, or this is the hot language today. And if you look, the languages are always changing. 10 years ago, if you look what the hot language was, it's not what it is today. I think they really have to have a love and a passion for learning. Our industry, in the computer science industry, is always changing. It's a rapidly changing industry. Think about a doctor, right? What doctors learned 10 years ago is very similar to what they learn today. Yes, there are advances, but it's not at the same pace, right? Think about where mobile devices were. Think about where software development was as a discipline 10 years ago. We're still a new industry, fairly new industry compared to other human endeavors. And I'd say if they have if they have a passion to learn, and they learn logic and how to program things, I think that's perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter the language. We had a discussion earlier about the fact that programming languages have at most 2,000 words, right? And human languages have at least 80,000 and more, most of them 100,000 and so on. So it's much easier once you know one language to learn the next and the next. I also like to say programming and software development needs a lot of determination. So I'm going to do a hand gesture here, but it's the difficulty curve, it's straight up for a while and then it plateaus. So it's this thing where if you're starting to learn development, you hit a wall, you have to learn what's object-oriented, what's this, why do I have to call this method, why is the compiler throwing me this cryptic error and this and that. So you continuously hit this wall for a while. And you have to just keep at it and be determined and keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, and then it's a plateau. It's really easy after that. It's flat or a gradual hill switching from one language to the other. But so it's this love of learning and this determination, just keep at it, you will break through it, you will get to it. So that would be my advice. At least my advice to myself if I were to go back and, now I've got to find a DeLorean.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.